Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's TIA Lunch and Learn webinar, Cargo Theft Response. Do you have a plan? We're joined by speakers from Highway and Travelers who will introduce themselves shortly. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we thank Highway and Travelers for helping us put on this webinar. My name is Anthony, and I will just be going over a few housekeeping items before we start up the webinar today. Again, thanks for joining us. Discussion, comments, and presentations during TIA functions must not, 1, refer to any past, present, or future rates, prices, or anything related thereto. 2, include any reference to marketing strategies. 3, include any discussion of boycotts of any person, product, or firm. Or 4, inhibit any members, employees from discussing employment with other member companies. Additionally, things you hear during the meeting that are confidential and private to TIA should not be shared publicly without its prior consent or used against or in competition with TIA. Next up, for questions during the webinar, we have 2 options for you to choose from. Both are in the Zoom control panel, which should be at the bottom of your screen. Please note that only you and our presenters will be able to see your questions if you submit using the Q&A button. If you use the webinar chat, everyone in attendance of the webinar will see your question. If you want to test that out right now, feel free to drop where you're joining us from in the chat, and everyone can chime in and see your message there. So at the end of the presentation, we're going to go through your questions and aim to get through every single one of them. You will have an opportunity to send us questions after the webinar, so if your question isn't addressed, no worries. And additionally, please note you will receive instructions to access the recording within 24 hours of the conclusion of this webinar. You will receive an email with instructions on how to access the recording using your TIA account. And please note only TIA members will have access to review this recording. And with that, I will hand it over to our speakers to begin the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anthony. And thank you to the TIA for having us. My name is Michael Grace. I am the VP of Customer Risk Management for Highway, and I am joined by the famous Scott Cornell from Travelers.
I am Scott Cornell. I am the transportation segment leader for Travelers Insurance. I have been involved in cargo theft investigations and supply chain security for this marks my 30th year, roughly. I think it's actually a little longer than that, but gives me a nice round number. So happy to be here. Thanks to the TIA and its members for having us.
Today, we're going to go over a few different things. The growing threat of cargo theft, how we don't see it decreasing anytime soon. Theft response planning and immediate steps on what to do after a theft occurs. How you can prevent theft through some of the tech that Highway has to offer, and then Scott's going to touch on building your plan for when the when the worst happens, when a load actually gets stolen. So we've been doing these kind of questions at some of the conferences that we attend, and it's kind of surprising, almost shocking, to really see what brokers, what intermediaries out there actually have a theft response plan in place that they can use and rely on when something happens. So we were just going to take a quick poll to kind of see what the audience has to say.
Yeah, Michael, you and I were at a conference last week where I asked this question to the audience, right? And the small number of people that raised their hands and said they had a plan in place was shocking. And just the day before that, I was at a different conference, asked the same question, and it was literally like maybe a half a dozen people in the audience that confirmed that they had a plan. So I think that's it's something we've been asking, and to your point, a lot lately, and that's what kind of drove today's lunch and learn, was the shocking number of people that we've seen that do not have a plan in place.
Right. Let's try to change that.
Well, this is heartening. This is good. Still a high number of people that don't, but it's great to see that number that the majority of people do. So that's a positive. That's probably the best we've seen, right?
Yeah, that's definitely refreshing. It's normally, swapped. So
Right.
that's good to see. Thanks. Thanks for sharing that.
All right. So when we talk about the current state of cargo theft, right, I usually almost always refer to CargoNet's numbers. I think that they do a great job of giving us an idea of what's going on in the industry. One of the things I always say is the numbers, the actual numbers, the 3625 that you see over there are just a sample size of what's going on. And in my estimation, I think it's about 1/10 to 1/15 of all cargo theft that's actually taking place. There's no mandatory reporting of cargo theft numbers in the United States. So companies like Verisk and a couple of the others that are out there, they gather what's voluntarily reported to them through members, law enforcement, open source, non-members, things like that. And they give us a good sample size. So I always say pay more attention to the trends than you do the actual numbers. But a couple things to show here. So first of all, if I could label this slide the growing mess, I would label it the growing mess, right? Because it just continues to get worse for the industry. The impact of cargo theft has been severe to the supply chain over the last 2-3 years, and I think it's something that almost everybody is aware of at this point. When you look at a couple of things here, you want to take note of. California is almost always number one, whether it's in combined cargo theft or straight theft or strategic theft. It's number one in both those categories. For overall cargo theft, Texas is number two. For strategic cargo theft, which is what targets freight brokers, Illinois is number two. On total cargo theft, Illinois sits at number three. Food and beverage remain the number one targeted commodity. It will always be that if all things are normal, right? So if we say, when cargo theft is normal, which is sort of like saying jumbo shrimp, food and beverage will be the number one targeted commodity. They like that commodity. They like the fact that it's hard to trace, that it's, what is going to be the level of effort that people put into recovering loads of frozen meats or seafoods or things like that. Can they be entered back into the supply chain? They're aware of all those complications, and so they take advantage of that. Household goods number two, and electronics is number three. I think it's important to note that those three commodities leading in targeted commodities are not that far off each other. That's why you see the average value of a cargo theft. I think last I saw the CargoNet number was about 206,000, and it had been pretty consistent right around that 200,000 mark for the last 3 years. And it's, even though I think the average value for a food and beverage is load is somewhere around 70,000, the annual or the average of an actual common cargo theft is up around that 200,000. That speaks to the fact that those three lead categories are so close to one another that household goods and electronics boost the average up. When you see top targeted location, warehouse, distribution centers, it is not that they're breaking into the warehouses. We're not seeing that. That's kind of old school. I think there was a crew that did that recently in Grapevine, Texas. But for the most part, we are not seeing warehouse crews. The warehouse and the distribution center is listed as the place where possession is taken of the freight by the bad guys as they execute a strategic cargo theft. So if they send somebody to go pick up that load, that's the location that's given. That's why you see warehouse and distribution centers as number one, truck stop, no surprise to me, is number two, and that's still going to be the targeted area for straight cargo theft.
These are our highway numbers. So this is what we, saw all last year. So we have our, highway for email tool. We can do a Gmail plugin, an Outlook plugin, and from those plugins last year, we blocked almost 915,000 fraudulent, email attempts to highway customers. And what I mean by that is these are the fraudulent email addresses that have been flagged for fraud, identity theft, or double brokerage or um, you know or stolen assets. I'm sorry, and these are the ones you want to stay away from. And our highway for email, it sits in your inbox, and it's going to tell you if they are a verified contact, or if they've been flagged for fraud, or if they're unverified. So it's just crazy that we've almost had 1 million emails just last year, almost blocked. It's insane. These guys, it's their full-time job to email and fish loads from freight brokers, and they're very good at doing that. So it's just very important for people to utilize our tools, have them turned on, and actually use them. I hate seeing loads that get stolen that could have been prevented with our simple, email plugin. Moving from the plugin, so identity alerts reported last year, almost 12,000. And, our top one is going to be identity theft. Someone is changing or spoofing an email of the legitimate motor carrier's email. So Michael's Trucking one would be Michael's Trucking with an L at the end at gmail.com. We're also seeing a lot of, double brokering, stolen assets. All these are being, reported to us on a daily basis. We probably get 70 to 150 new reports a day, depending on what's happening that day. So it's a nonstop flow of, constant attacks. We also observed almost 10,000 different carrier users from 75 different countries. So it's crazy to me to see how much of the U.S. supply chain is controlled outside of the U.S. Yes, there are a lot of legitimate third-party, dispatching services out there, but you really want to be careful who you're doing business with and know your carrier. So, the top 6 countries that we see logging in that are not U.S. based is going to be Mexico, Pakistan, India, Uzbekistan, Serbia, and Moldova. So those are our top 6 non-U.S. countries that logged in last year. As far as FMCSA contact changes, we had 45,000, almost 46,000 email changes, about 63,000 phone number changes in the FMCSA. I'd say about 3% of those were actually fraudulent changes. And, the good thing about when carriers sign up with Highway, we are going to proactively, notify them of any FMCSA changes that they may or may not have done themselves. Sometimes we'll walk into the office on a Monday and, there'll be 100 or 300 at a time that these guys are manipulating with FMCSA. So as we proactively notify them, it gives them the chance to contact FMCSA, correct the spoofed or fraudulent, email and phone number that have been listed, and have, protect the carrier from being a victim of identity theft. On top of that, we have our Highway for VoIP product that came out late last year. So when these scammers are calling to fish loads from the brokers, over the phone, they're typically calling from a non-verified phone number, or they're using a computer program to change that phone number on the caller ID so it states the carrier's safer phone number or registered phone number. Our Highway for VoIP tool can recognize the actual phone number, and it can identify it as a verified phone number or a non-verified phone number or a fraudulent phone number. So based on those categories, we can route that call to the appropriate department at the freight broker, whether it's an endless hold queue for a fraudster or a non-verified person, put them into the carrier compliance queue, or if it's a verified user, let them talk to carrier sales. But out of all that, we blocked over 9,000 spoof calls just in Q4 last year.
I think one of the big things to take note of out of here is the number of countries that you're seeing the attempts from. One of the things that we talk about quite frequently is this is what's driving the massive increase in cargo theft, right? The ability to commit strategic theft from anywhere on the planet. So basically, they can target freight wherever it is, and from wherever they are. And that has become a big part of the driver, in addition to the fact that because they're operating internationally, they have an international marketplace, so to speak, that they can move the freight. And that's been a big part of the driving force between the massive increases in numbers that we've seen, rather than these small, unsophisticated crews that we saw for decades operating primarily here in the United States in the key hotspots. They didn't have the ability to move freight like these new, more sophisticated crews do. So these international crews, they have a global appetite for these goods. They launder the goods well enough that they can actually sell some of them, making them appear legitimate, and the rest, they have their places they can sell whether it appears legitimate or not. So this has really been a huge part of the driving factor for the massive increases that we've seen since first quarter of 2022.
Why the industry is still isn't prepared. A lot of freight brokers don't believe they're going to be targeted. They're going to think it's going to just be a normal day at work. And then, three loads get stolen because, a sales rep isn't paying attention. The lack of designated response roles, right? If you don't have, an organized carrier compliance claims department, and really just roles of everybody involved that needs to be involved when something happens, you're going to be ripping your hair out, not knowing what to do. And that's not going to help you find your load. Uh, you know, Theft often happens, outside of business hours during holidays. Like, God can back me up on this, but like every time it's 4th of July or Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter or any holiday that everyone else is, having fun, you're going to be busy because that's when people are out of the office making mistakes. And that's when these guys work overtime when everyone else is taking time off. And you really do see a considerable spike on those big holiday weekends.
Yeah, it's never convenient. I always say cargo theft doesn't happen Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. Most of the phone calls I get, or our team, our cargo theft team gets, are weekends, late nights, middle of the morning, things like that. That's when it happens quite often. I mean, a lot of this strategic cargo theft, the redirecting of loads, is happening during normal business hours and during the week now. And I know that when I look closely at the CargoNet numbers, they have a day of the week stat, and it used to be pretty much, a pronounced curve, meaning it happened on the weekends, and during the week you would see a massive slowdown. That chart now for CargoNet is pretty even across, meaning with these new strategic theft methods, cargo theft can happen any day of the week, any time of the day or night, doesn't matter. So you have to be ready to respond no matter what time, no matter whether it's a holiday weekend. Michael, you point out they love the long holiday weekends, 4th of July weekends, Memorial Days, you name it, any of those long, drawn out weekends. Thanksgiving weekend, tends to be a real nightmare, but they love those long weekends for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's their favorite time to take advantage. And then a lot of folks have, very limited knowledge of law enforcement task forces or people like CargoNet or TAPA or, JJ's Southwest Transportation Security Council, and there's many others. And a lot of people are just unprepared in general. So
Yeah, I think, when you look at the reasons here, all of them apply, right? So most of us don't think that our car is going to get stolen. We don't go out every day paranoid that our car is going to get stolen. Certainly we lock it. But as we know, cargo thieves, a locked car door doesn't really stop them, and it's really no different with cargo theft, right? We don't think it's going to happen to us for the most part. I think the industry is becoming more leery about that, more aware of the fact that it could. That lack of designated response roles is critical. It's something we're going to talk about here today in detail, but not knowing what to do when the theft happens or who's supposed to do what and trying to figure out who's supposed to do what at the time of the theft becomes a real issue. As you pointed out, and we talked about the off hours are difficult. Limited knowledge of law enforcement, certainly always call law enforcement first, always report the theft to the police. Sometimes the question is, who do you report that to? What law enforcement entity? You want to report it to the jurisdiction of where possession was taken of the freight, right? If you're in Chicago and you're moving a load in City of Industry, California, that is where the freight was picked up. That's where possession was taken. That's who's going to have jurisdiction. The question then becomes, do you then know somebody on the task force in California that you can call to follow up? Because that's really who's going to work that case, right? That local department quite often is not going to be the one working the case. So having that knowledge, understanding that, and understanding who to call is critical to that. And most people are unprepared for how chaotic it becomes, right? How crazy it can be, how all over the place a cargo theft can be, especially if it's something like they're pretending it's a hostage load, things like that. That can become really confusing for people, and most people don't really realize how bad that can be until they're going through it.
Next slide, Anthony. Thank you, sir. This is Scott's slide, and Scott's a football coach, and you got to have your game plan, right? You can't just wait for something to happen and draw your plan in the sand on the field, right? You got to have a game plan going into it every time.
Yeah, you don't maybe if you're playing in your backyard with your kids, you're drawing up the plays in the dirt, right? But if you're coaching a football team and you go to game day and you are drawing plays up in the sand as you go between every down, you're almost guaranteed to lose. And it's the same thing with having a plan for responding to a cargo theft. If you're drawing up your response at the moment that you're experiencing the theft, you're going to be in a bad way. It's not going to go well for you, and it almost never works out the way that you hope it will. So that's what we're here to talk about today, is you have to have that plan. It all has to be drawn up, written out, organized, and ready to execute when it happens. So assign a response team, right? First thing you want to do is you want to identify the key members in your organization who are going to be at the forefront of that theft response. And what is each person's role? And who is the backup for that role? We have vacations, we have people that are sick, they might be doing something, let's say one of the people on your response team is an avid hiker, right? And they're out somewhere at the time of the theft where they don't have a cell signal. You need to have that first tier, second tier, third tier response person in each of the roles, right? So identify the members of your team who are going to be in that, and you may want to rotate where they are in that, right? So people can take turns. So in other words, our team, when we respond to cargo thefts for our clients, not everybody's on call 24/7, but somebody is on call 24/7, right? So meaning it could be one of the guys that's in California that ends up picking up the phone, but they know how to get a hold of the person that's in Florida or Georgia. Well, the same thing can be for yours. Michael, you could be, for the first quarter of the year, the main contact, the first point of contact, and the two people behind you are the backups. But then after the first quarter, whoever's in the second spot becomes the lead, and you become one of the backups for the next quarter, and you rotate that. And that can make it a little bit easier for your team to be involved in that. But you have to have everybody's role planned out. In other words, who's going to gather the information? Who's going to gather all the information that's necessary for law enforcement or any kind of investigator that you're going to engage, whether it's somebody in-house, a private investigator, somebody at your insurance carrier, or the law enforcement entities, there has to be a person designated for gathering all the right information. That doesn't mean that that information isn't coming from 4 or 5 different people. It just means that there is a single point of contact that's gathering and putting together all of that information so that it's easily transferred to whoever it is that you're going to engage to go out there and try and recover that. If you have somebody in-house that is going to do recovery for you, and there are a lot of companies out there that have somebody in-house, investigators or somebody that's designated as kind of a lead person for this to go out and respond, you have to have that person designated, and then you have to have backups for that. There has to be somebody who's going to relay the information. There has to be somebody who's going to be the regular point of contact. There has to be somebody that's going to coordinate all of this, everybody's roles together to get the final result. There has to be somebody who's in charge of getting the information from the driver or the customer or those things, right? And then there has to be somebody who is going to communicate all this with law enforcement as well as some of the other other resources we have there. Know your top contacts, right? So maintain a list of your top 3 internal and external contacts. So once you have that designated team internally, then you need to know who you're reaching out to externally. Law enforcement is not, I would not put that in your top 3 internal or sorry, external contacts. You're always going to contact them, so that's a given, right? But who else do you have? Who do you know? I always ask this question. Who do you know that will pick up the phone for you at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night and will have the right contacts, the right knowledge, the ability to go out and try and recover loads for you, whether that's investigators at your insurance company, whether that's private investigators that you engage. And listen, there is a small handful of private investigators out there that actually know this stuff. So you need to know who they are. You need to know those resources. You need to know what part of the country they're in, or what part of the country they have contacts in, or what part of the country they can operate in, or can they operate in Canada? Can they operate in Mexico? You know, it is a small circle of expertise for that in the private investigator world, so to speak. So you have to have not only those internal roles and contacts in place, but who immediately are going to engage externally. Definitely you want to belong to security networks, like the TIA Watchdog organization. CargoNet is a fantastic resource for data for lane evaluations. They have a new route score tool that's out that allows you to give yourself kind of a threat assessment of the route that your load is going to be taken on. TAPA, which is the Transported Asset Protection Association, is a nonprofit supply chain security best practices and procedures organization. It is a wealth of knowledge. I currently, full disclosure, sit as the chairman for TAPA Americas, but I've been involved in TAPA for almost 20 years. It's nonprofit. There's no commercial angle to it, and they are going to be releasing freight broker security standards to the industry pretty soon. There are regional security councils like the Southwest Transportation Security Council, the Midwest Transportation Security Council, the Western States Transportation Security Council. They're very inexpensive, and they provide great networking opportunities, and they provide great contacts. So even if you have a plan and you think you think you're prepared, sometimes it happens in a place where you just didn't plan or you didn't think it was going to happen. And a lot of those security councils or these different organizations, somebody will know somebody, right? We always joke about I know a guy. Well, somebody in that organization will know a guy, so to speak, that you can reach out to and potentially get some help. And then I can't stress this enough. Conduct quarterly theft response drills, including off-hour scenarios. So I tell my clients, you probably should do it on a quarterly basis, at least do it 3 times a year, where you come into work that day and you pretend you had a cargo theft and you see how everybody responds to that cargo theft. You create a scenario, you pretend that it's actually happening, and at least one of those should be conducted at inconvenient hours. 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, 3 o'clock at night on a Friday, you name it, right? You need to make it as realistic as possible. And then you kind of do a post-mortem on that. How did we do? How did everybody react? Did everybody pick up the phone? where our contacts, and a lot of times you can get contacts, like we will participate in these for our clients sometimes, right? Just to see if somebody knows how to reach out to our team and execute with our team. But if you have private investigators that you have chosen that, hey, if we have a theft, we're going to use them, ask them to participate in that with you. 9 times out of 10, they'll do that as a courtesy, just to help you have that best practice in place, because they know they're going to get that call from you. So run those mock theft drills, go back through it, do a post-mortem. How did we do? How did everybody do? Did everybody execute their role? Did we get the information we needed quickly? You can't really call law enforcement or a resource and say we had a theft, but not be able to supply them with the information. What's being hauled? Where was it stolen? What was the last point of contact? Who did you talk to last? Do you have the driver's information? Do you have the tractor and trailer information? Do you have any details on the freight? What was the last known location if you had it? Is there any tracking in there? You have to have all that information when you make those critical calls. Michael, I don't know if you want to add anything to any of that.
No, absolutely. And Jonathan, you go to the next slide, but if you're a freight broker and you've dealt with a theft in the past and you call 911 to try to report that theft, for the 911 dispatcher is going to be like, what's a freight broker and you are located where? They're most likely not going to be able to help you in a way that the cargo theft units would be able to help you if you called them directly. But I always recommend, like, as soon as you find out something has been stolen, your first call needs to be to the shipper. See who was loaded, see if they have any driver details, photos of the truck, license plates, driver phone numbers, copies of the CDL, and then you ask them, hey, we think this load might be stolen. Will you please file a police report as soon as possible? Because they need that police report filed. So if I, talk to my friends at California Highway Patrol, I can tell them this is the police report number. Everything's been filled out already. It's actively marked stolen, and then they can actually go to assist you. If it's not reported stolen, the theft didn't happen, and law enforcement can't help you. So you really need to rely on your shippers to help you get the police reports filed as quickly as possible. And as freight brokers, we see a lot of pushback from our shippers not wanting to help us with police reports, because at the end of the day, they don't really care. They're going to charge the freight broker for the price of the load anyways. So getting buy-in and working with your shipper goes a long way, because they are eyes on the ground. They know who they loaded, and you really need to work with them to get the right information so you can have a chance at recovery. So that would be my first point. You obviously want to notify CargoNet right away. This is why you gotta have your team, right? Someone's got to be on the phone with the shipper, telling them what to do. Someone needs to be sending the details to CargoNet, and another person needs to be, documenting everything and putting everything in one piece. So, 911 alone is just not going to cut it. You have to be doing multiple things to notify everybody if you want to have a chance to recover this cargo.
Yeah, and I think, something that you point out there, call CargoNet, even if you're not a member, right? CargoNet will take the report in and they will blast it out to the industry on their alerts. They're not going to help you, if you're not a member, they can't help you beyond that, I don't think. But getting it out there, getting that knowledge out there, and if it ends up, that your load gets recovered as part of a larger bust and everything like that, at least they'll have it on record. So if law enforcement calls them and says, hey, who owns these widgets, right? Do you know who owns these widgets? CargoNet may have that because you reported it to them, and that may help you get that recovery anyway. So, I would encourage everybody to report it, even if you're not a member. Definitely coordinate with your shipper, your customers immediately. No delays. I think that's important. I think that in the past, years ago, it was, hey, we want to see if we can solve this problem by ourselves. We don't want to alert the customer, or we don't want to alert our shipper. Everybody, I think, at this point understands that this is an issue, right? And we're all in it together. So we all need to work together immediately as quickly as possible, have that open communication. Everybody needs to come together and try and get the information together, bring resources together, and like that. So notify them quickly. And, where it says there, so alert your insurance provider as well. Again, we have in-house investigators at Travelers that investigate cargo theft on behalf of our clients 24/7, 365. But even if your insurance company doesn't have that, they may have private investigators that they have relationships with, that they have hired in the past, that they use on a regular basis. And that'll be a great resource for you. So you should reach out to your insurance provider, see what they can do, see how they can help you with that. And a lot of times they'll offer different suggestions or some resources, and document absolutely everything. Keep in mind too that a lot of times the bad guys will make you think that you're involved in a hostage load situation, and they're just doing that to give themselves time to get away with your freight. It doesn't mean that there aren't some actual hostage load situations where you can potentially get the load back. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is they want to make you think you're going to get the load back. So they will get into negotiations with you, tell you that there's 3 or 4 different loads that you have to pay for, things like that. But they're really just doing it to take you away from that instant reporting, bringing resources instantaneously to the issue so that they can get away with the freight.
Thanks, Scott. And yeah, so here's what Highway does, and most people on the call know what Highway does, but protecting every load with our technology really does make a difference in a fight against cargo theft and fraud. So we're kind of going to go through this little timeline and kind of show you everything that we do to protect your cargo. First thing, we want to keep the bad guys out of our network. I kind of touched on this earlier, but we have the Highway, for Outlook, Highway for Gmail plugin that just fits in your email inbox. Yes, you have to pin it up, but it does show you, hey, this person has been flagged for fraud, or hey, this is a verified contact, or hey, this is an unknown contact. Maybe we need to verify them. So stopping the fraud in your inbox, it goes a long way, because like I said earlier, identity theft is the number one ID alert that we get in daily, right? People's emails are constantly being faked, like throughout the day, nonstop, 24/7. There are people that do this for a living, and it only takes one person in carrier sales not paying attention to miss a period in an email address in the wrong position, and they've tendered loads to the wrong person because they didn't have their plugin popped up. Our Highway for VoIP, same kind of thought process, but it takes those flagged phone numbers, reads them, and it kicks them out of your network, so the bad guys don't get on the phone with your carrier sales folks or whoever's booking loads and trick them into thinking that they're the actual legitimate carrier. For sourcing, we have our lane certainty and our lane certainty tool, where you can put in origin, destination, zips, and equipment type, and it's going to find the right carrier for every load. Then you can source that carrier and onboard them in our Connect product. And in our Connect product, with Highway onboarding, we're trying to answer 3 main questions about the user's identity. First one is, who are you? Second one is, do you really have the authority to represent the carrier you claim to be? And the third is, and what equipment do you actually have? Do you actually have the equipment that you say that you have? So as we're verifying all these people, actually they are who they say they are. We have them sign in with Highway with our single sign-on. It's very similar to like signing in with Facebook or Google, but it's passwordless. You can move right through, and it significantly boosts digital adoption, security, and it's fast, efficient, secure, and it's free for carriers. After clicking on the sign on the highway, a user will face the identity engine, which authenticates and authorizes every user who onboards with the broker. The engine verifies the identity of the user in a digital session and whether that user has authority to represent the carrier that he claims to be. And then we get into, monitoring these carriers and then low-level compliance with our LoadLock tool. So, if you're using our LoadLock platform, that is, load level protection on every single load. We're going to get your load data. We're going to see origin and destination places. We're going to run that carrier's booking information. We're going to see, hey, did you book with a fraudulent email domain, or is this carrier overbooked? Is this an overbooked carrier? Maybe you booked a 2 power unit carrier booked on 20 loads. That's not right. You shouldn't book them because they're not using their own trucks. Or maybe you'll get an out of range alert. Say you got a truck picking up in Atlanta, but their closest truck is in Dallas and they pick up in 2 hours. That means that carrier is not using their own equipment to pick up the load, and it's either being double brokered or stolen. So, we encourage you to use our full suite of products to have the best protection possible to prevent, cargo theft.
All right, so kind of touched on this earlier. This is kind of a recap of who you have to have for internal contacts, right? Head of risk or compliance or claim leader. It depends on how you build up your teams at your place of business, right? Do you have somebody that's in charge of risk? Do you have somebody that's in charge of supply chain security? We're seeing more and more companies have somebody internal that is a supply chain security person. I can't tell you enough. I think that's definitely worthwhile if it's something that you think you're at risk for. A claim leader can also often we see them take a role for this, but when you get to your internal contacts, right? Private investigator. Do you have? If you don't have, if your insurance company doesn't have a resource, you should at least know a private investigator that can respond to this for you and has expertise in this area. Again, there is a small circle of private investigators that do this on a consistent basis that are specialists in it. Unfortunately for the industry, we lost one of the all-time greats last year in Jeff Hall, but there are several others out there. Again, it is a small circle, but you just need to know who they are. And if you don't know who they are, reach out to somebody who will, right? Reach out to somebody like myself or Michael or somebody at CargoNet or something like that who would know some of those names. You have to understand law enforcement and how they operate. As an example, Michael mentioned earlier that, and I also said you definitely want to call the police department where possession of the freight was taken. But let's say it's in Southern California. California is the #1 state in the nation for cargo theft. They also have the most dedicated law enforcement towards cargo theft in the nation. So, is it within the jurisdiction of the CTIPS task force, which is the California Highway Patrol? Is it in the jurisdiction of the LA County Sheriffs or LAPD task force? Do you have the numbers of those people on those task forces so that you can call those people directly instead of having further delay for the report to potentially go from that local PD to that task force? That task force is going to need that police report that you file with that local PD. So don't jump right to the task force. Get that local police report, right? And then bring that to the task force. You can do both at the same time if you want to, but you kind of need to have that information for the task force. And do you have an industry connector? Now that, what does that mean? That means somebody like myself or Keith Lewis from CargoNet or Michael or John Cannon or any of those people that know everybody, right? Chuck Forsyth from PCSC, people that know everybody, people that know who they can call, JJ Coughlin. And where do you get that? Well, you get that through industry participation, right? Attending webinars like this. Last week, JJ Coughlin held the Southwest Transportation Security Council Summit at BNSF Rail in Fort Worth, Texas. And I think there was over 300 people in the room. You should walk out of a conference like that loaded with contact information, loaded with phone numbers of people you can call. TAPA, the TIA watchdog, will often have contacts and ways to get contacts from other people, but you need to know somebody who knows everybody else and who can reach out to. I tell everybody all the time, you can take my contact information. If you have an incident, feel free to call me. I will connect you with resources. I will connect you with people. Just about everybody in a role like mine says the same thing. We're all willing to help one another, but you need to know who's going to get you to the right resources and the right contacts. And that's not always going to be me. That's not always going to be Michael. It's not always going to be Keith. Sometimes it could be specific to an industry, specific to a commodity, specific to an area of the country, you name it.
Yeah, it's very important to network and get to know people. It's a very small circle. Everybody knows everybody, and people can really come in handy when something goes wrong. So it's good to network. But as far as building your plan, review your current processes, map your internal and external contacts, practice your response plan a few times a year, and the most important one, track prevented thefts to prove ROI. This is the most underutilized,
Absolutely.
point on this slide because the C-suite doesn't care about things that they don't know about, and you cannot ask them for better tools. Like you can't ask them for tools to help your team recover loads unless they know how much you're actually recovering. So when you recover a load with your plan, like notate that and notate the value of that load. That could have been a $500,000 load that you and your insurance underwriter does not have to pay for because you were quick to respond and recover the cargo.
And
And
not just the
if
recoveries, Michael, but the preventions, right? The ones that you
exactly,
prevented, where you had 6 attempts this week and you thwarted all 6 of them, right? And
yep,
then, you look at the value of those loads that you were able to prevent the theft from happening on, and you use that number for your ROI, right?
yep, and that's what you can do to argue for a CargoNet membership. It's crazy how many people call me after a soul mode, and I asked them, hey, do you have a CargoNet membership? And they're like, no, we didn't want to pay the $1,000 a year, and it can totally pays for itself with one recovery and all the connections that they have. It's a no brainer to join some of these networks. So yeah, I think that's all we have. So we'll be happy to take some Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott and Michael. Appreciate that wonderful information. And thank you all in that chat. See a lot of action going on there, and we have about 10 questions in the Q&A. So it seems like there's been some activities in the chat amongst the attendees, which is fine. But again, if anyone has any questions that they have not submitted yet, I would suggest doing now so through the Q&A, since that's a little bit more organized, since we have about 300 of you on this call today. So we can start out getting through some of these questions. And Michael and Scott, unless you two wanted to start on one, I will start going through the list. But before I start, did anything stand out from you, from the Q&A or the chat that you wanted to address before we get started?
Take them as you bring them.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, the first note we had, is there a way beyond associations to match VINs to MCs that are sold?
Way beyond associations to match VINs. Well, there's several services out there. Michael, do you guys do any of that before I answer this, or do you guys get into any of that?
Yeah, so we can match VINs under the associations tab if the same ELD has been connected. You know, we're looking at inspections, ELD connections, and uh, certificate of insurance schedules for VIN populations. So if it's been if it's been on the COI, we've seen the inspection, or we've seen an ELD connection, we will have kind of a timeline of which carrier has used that VIN and where in highway. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. And David, who asked that, feel free to reach out directly to Highway to get more information there. Next question we had was, could you discuss the cargo theft reporting page for the California Highway Patrol? I recently discovered it and it has been very helpful.
Yeah, so they have their own. I think Florida still has one too. I will admit that I'm not as familiar with them because we usually report directly to them through our team that's over there. But I believe Florida still has theirs, and California Highway Patrol has theirs, where you can go on to their website. I don't have that link. I wish I would have. I didn't anticipate that question. It's the first time I've gotten it, but you can go in there and you can report your cargo theft information, put the information in there, and it queues it up for them. I still think it's always best to have direct contact with those task forces whenever possible. They're usually working cases pretty fast and furious, so to speak. So the quicker you can get in touch with them directly, the better. But I don't really use that frequently, so I can't really speak to too much detail on that. Apologize.
Thank you, Scott. Next question we had was, how do you address issues where the shipper/customer is in Mexico and is not able to file a police report in the US?
Are we talking about
Hopefully
ahead,
hopefully your liability is limited to $2 a pound, or you have no liability in Mexico. Is my workaround answer. But what were you going to say, Scott?
Yeah, I guess my question, my return on that would be: are you talking about a theft that took place in Mexico or in the U.S., or you're just saying that the freight is owned by a Mexican entity in the U.S.? They can still file a police report, or you can have work with one of your partners, your business partners, to help facilitate the filing of that report. But you should be able to file, unless I'm misunderstanding the question. If you're a Mexican entity and the theft takes place in the US, you can still file the police report.
We did have another question here. Is there anything in the works from the government/law enforcement to try and help with the issue? And before I allow Scott and Michael to tackle that one, I just want to say, if you have not attended the TIA policy forum, we highly, highly recommend doing that. You come on to Capitol Hill with TIA representatives and other members from your state, and you lobby your representatives. It's always in September. Feel free to either reach out to education@TIA.net, where I can provide you more information, or meetings, or just check out the TIA website. But I just wanted to give that plug in there because that is where you members can make your voice heard. But I just wanted to let that note go in there before I turn it over to Scott and Michael there.
Yeah, that was the first thing I was going to mention. Was TIA does a great job. We actively participate in the TIA. I sit as the vice chair of the TIA Fraud Task Force, and I've seen the government affairs division do a lot of work on behalf of the membership and the industry with that. So what is being planned? The FMCSA is making some changes. It's hard to predict timelines when it comes to big changes like that, but they have gone out to the industry on several occasions and presented and talked about the changes that they're making and verifying who is who, whether it's through for the purchase of an MC number, or who's making changes to accounts on FMCSA. They're making several different steps. They're going to have a verification process that will take place, that will be first instituted on new applicants for MC numbers, and then I think it's a year after that. And don't quote me on the time frame, but I think it's a year after that they will go back to the existing pool and go back and re-verify that existing pool. So we are seeing the FMCSA not only reach out to the industry, but make an effort to make some changes on some of that. I don't know the full extent. I think that's undecided yet as to how far they're going to go and how detailed that's going to get. They also have a fraud investigative team that's assigned to them now. It's being operated through the DOT, but I found that team to be extremely responsive, and again, participating in the industry. So I think we're seeing some of that. And then there are, I want to say 3 pieces of legislation teed up that would address cargo theft. But the one primary one that's in the lead is one of the ones that the TIA Government Affairs Department has been working with, and several other entities as well, that would call for a federally funded task force that would, I think that the bill that's the favored bill calls for a combination of an FBI Homeland Security task force, which I think would be good for the industry, and hopefully they would work with state designated members of the task forces in the key states where that happens. So those bills have seemed to have gotten some good traction and seem to be getting good support. I'm hoping that one of those gets passed and put some dedicated resources around cargo theft. I think it's needed, and I think there's a lot of people putting a lot of effort in on that.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. We just have time for 1 or 2 more questions, everyone. I just want to remind you, you will have the opportunity to reach out to Highway directly for more information on some of these questions you might have that are better suited for email or phone call. Scott and Michael have also answered a number of the questions throughout some of their other explanations, and also like throughout the presentation. I saw a few questions about time frames. So I just wanted to pose this one. What is the time frame to report the theft to law enforcement? For example, if the theft is reported weeks or months later, should it still be reported? I guess we have seen fake PODs being provided.
Yeah, so I think what they're referring to is what the industry is commonly calling cluster thefts right now, where, all along the loads have been getting a proof of delivery, and then it's discovered months later that the loads were shorted over a period of time. Multiple loads were shorted over a period of time. You're still going to want to report that. You have to really be good at how you explain this to law enforcement. My good friend Keith Lewis from CargoNet always talks about, right, that you should talk about it as, theft by deception, theft by fraud, language that law enforcement commonly uses, so that you can then explain to them how it was carried out. And if you explain that to them very clearly, they should still be willing to take that report in most cases, and they will understand that it is much bigger than the one theft, right? So always, in my opinion, always report the cargo theft, get that report in there, even if they give you a courtesy report, so to speak. You want to push for that theft report, but if you get that courtesy report, at least you still have that, you have it reported. Always report the theft.
Yeah, I'll always report the theft, and especially if you're planning on using your insurance to file that claim, that they're going to want, all the backup and documentation to prove, that falsified POD is actually a falsified POD. Those are not easy to get covered. So
now, I'll just throw in, I know somebody put the link in for the CTIP cargo theft loss notification, just to kind of touch back on that. I would, everybody should grab that link, but take note on that website that you do need to provide them with the agency you reported it to and the report number that you reported it to. So again, you're letting CTIP, the task force, know that you have a cargo theft, but it has to be reported to that local jurisdiction first, so that they have a report to go off of.
Thank you, Scott and Michael. And I everyone, that does it for questions today. I just want to give a huge thanks to Highway and Travelers for Scott and Michael's time today. And also just keep in mind the TIA, we have a number of resources that have been previously mentioned. You can check out our member resource library for more information on the cargo theft frameworks. You can find other webinars, and you can also find information on the policy forum that we mentioned. Also, in a few weeks here, we have the Capital Ideas Conference, which hopefully you have registered for, where you be able to see other top conversations on topics just like this and other presentations from Highway. Michael and Scott, did you all want to leave off with anything before we wrap up today? I know you all have been busy.
No, thanks for having me. If anyone has any follow-up questions, email is right there at the bottom. Feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to get back with you. But thanks again for having us.
Yeah, same. I'll answer as many questions or inquiries as I can. Thank you for your time today. Hopefully this gave you some insight. It really, we're not providing a completely detailed plan on how to, but we're kind of giving you a roadmap of how to design a response and what big pieces you need to have in place, right? And there are certainly a lot of experts out there that can help you get into the details of that as well. So thank you to the TIA, and Michael, thanks for inviting me to do this with you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
coming.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Anthony.
Thanks for your attendance, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Scott. We will see you next time, everyone. Bye-bye.